All right, let's dive right in. We're going to unravel a paradox today, a real head-scratcher that sits right at the heart of our global economy. It's a question that, on the surface, seems completely impossible to answer.
I mean, think about it for a second. The United States, China, Japan, Germany, pretty much every country you can name owes staggering amounts of money. So if every single nation is a debtor, and the total amount of global debt has exploded to $315 trillion, that's a number so big it's hard to even wrap your head around, almost 3 times the size of the entire world economy.
Who holds the IOU? Who does the entire world owe all this money to? The answer, as you're about to see, is way more surprising than you might think.
To really get it, we've got to jump back to the 17th century. See, national debt wasn't born from some kind of economic failure. It was invented for war. Back in 1694, England desperately needed money to fight France. So the brand new Bank of England came up with an idea, the government bond. It was basically a promise. Lend us money now and we'll pay you back later with future tax money, plus a little extra for your trouble. And this idea? It was a complete game changer. It turned borrowing into a tool of national power.
So, let's fast forward to today and see how that all plays out. And what better place to start than with the biggest debtor on the planet, the United States. The U.S. national debt is now north of $38 trillion. That's a truly mind-boggling figure. So the big question is, who exactly is holding all those IOUs?
Now this is where it gets really interesting, because what you're looking at here shatters a really common myth. Of the debt that can actually be bought and sold on the market, a whopping 2/3 of it is owned by Americans. Yeah, we're talking U.S. banks, insurance companies, the Federal Reserve. It's inside your retirement account, your pension plan. Only about 1/3 of it is actually held by foreign countries and investors.
And when you zoom in on that foreign-held chunk, guess who's at the top of the list? It's Japan, then China, then the UK. So that whole narrative you hear about the U.S. being in debt to China, well, it's true, but China holds only a tiny fraction of the total, something like 2%.
So here's the first big reveal. America's debt is basically this giant circular system. The Treasury issues bonds, American institutions and people buy them, and then American taxpayers fund the interest payments that flow right back into those same American accounts. The biggest creditor is a mirror image of the debtor.
And this circular logic, it isn't just an American thing. It's pretty much the blueprint for the entire global financial system.
This quote just nails it. It really is like a planetary game of hot potato. You've got Japan holding U.S. debt, the U.S. helps fund the IMF, which then lends money to Europe, European banks then lend to developing nations, and what do those nations do with their extra cash? They buy U.S. government bonds because they're seen as a super safe place to park it. It's this incredibly complex web where every single promise is just backed up by another promise.
So who are the dealers at this global table?
The central banks. They're the ones making the whole market work. When a central bank, like the Fed in the US or the ECB in Europe, decides to buy government bonds, they're essentially creating new money out of thin air to do it. Every dollar, every euro, every yen in existence is basically an IOU. There's no such thing as debt-free money anymore.
And what this does is give financial markets, the bond traders, the hedge funds, the credit rating agencies, an incredible amount of power. They get to decide which countries can borrow money on the cheap and which ones are going to get punished with high interest rates. Their confidence, or lack of it, can literally make or break a country.
Okay, and that brings us to maybe the biggest secret of all in this whole thing. The one detail that explains why this mountain of debt just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
When you or I take out a loan for a car or a house, the whole point is to pay back the principal, right? To get to zero and be debt-free. But governments, they don't play by those rules. Their goal isn't to pay back the debt. It's simply to roll it over. That means when an old bond comes due, they just issue a new bond to pay for it. So the goal isn't to be debt-free. It's just to stay credible enough to keep borrowing forever.
And let me be clear, this isn't some wild conspiracy theory. It's just policy. The entire system is built not on the promise of repayment, but on the world's confidence in the ability to repay. As long as investors believe the U.S. government, for example, is good for its interest payments, the whole machine just keeps humming along.
But why? Why not just try to pay it off? Well, because government bonds, especially U.S. Treasury bonds, are seen as the safest financial asset on the planet. They are the bedrock of the entire global financial system. Your pension fund, big banks, other countries' central banks, they all rely on these bonds for stability. If the U.S. were to actually pay off its debt, it would vaporize the world's most trusted asset.
and that would almost certainly trigger a global economic collapse.
So yeah, the system is kind of like a shark. It has to keep moving forward, constantly issuing new debt just to stay alive. Trying to stop and pay it all off would be like a shark trying to stop swimming. It just doesn't work.
But this whole system, this machine that's built on perpetual motion and, let's be honest, fragile trust, well, it comes with a very real and very high cost.
You just have to look at what happened to Greece. When markets lost faith in them back in 2010, they didn't get a fresh start. They got painful austerity, brutal tax hikes, massive spending cuts, and huge unemployment, all just to get a bailout.
Or look at Argentina. Repeated defaults on their debt have basically turned it into a national curse, wiping out people's savings and setting the country back for generations.
And more recently, Sri Lanka. When they couldn't make their loan payments, it led to massive fuel shortages and eventually a total political and economic meltdown. The point is, when that confidence breaks, the real-world consequences are absolutely devastating for ordinary people.
And there's another cost too, one that's a little more subtle. Those interest payments on all this debt, they don't just magically circulate. They flow in a very specific direction, upward. The money moves from the taxes paid by ordinary workers and citizens to the big institutions, banks, and wealthy investors who actually own the bonds. This creates a systematic, ongoing transfer of wealth. It's a key reason why rising global debt and rising global inequality seem to go hand in hand. The system is designed to reward people who already have money to lend.
So we end up right back where we started. We now know that the creditor, in a very strange way, is us. The whole thing is a self-referencing loop of promises that literally powers our modern world. But it leaves us with one final, very unsettling question. This entire $315 trillion structure is built on a simple promise. What happens when it becomes clear that promise can't be kept forever?